Hello, everyone. Happy to be here to talk to you all about cybercrime. First, you heard about how big the problem is. The number was $6.3 billion. What I'm going to do first is explain to you how we actually arrived at that figure, which was quite an odyssey. We did a very large study with premium advertisers. When I started this company, we started it based on evidence that we had that money was changing hands in ad fraud. And that was a big surprise to me because I didn't know a lot about advertising. My sense as an outsider was that online advertising was extraordinarily performance-driven and measurement-driven and so highly targeted that it's starting to creep people out. And I thought, how could bot fraud be a crime that scales since, to put it very simply, Google knows what I had for breakfast. So how could they be duped at the level where billions of dollars are going to the wrong people? So as we started studying the problem, I saw direct evidence to the contrary, but I kept thinking, this must be a selection bias. We must just be looking at the shittiest parts of the web. And let's not extrapolate too far. So we decided to put together a study with a bunch of national American brands, some really big ones. Here are some of their logos. We just wanted to look at their ad buying exactly as it is in place with the performance monitoring that they do, with the targeting that they have in place, with all the vendors that they have in place for protection. And we found that absolutely none of them were immune to bot fraud, not a single one, across the entire sample size. And none of these ad buying teams were goofing off. None of them were asleep at the wheel. None of them were being lazy. And every single one of them was being affected by the same kind of cybercrime that I was seeing affecting small advertising vendors, and also that I saw affecting the core of the digital ad chain when we plugged in at that level. So that suggested that this problem was actually really enormous, and we were able to back into some costs. That number was, as I said, $6.3 billion, and this was the best, most scientific study of its kind, not least because we didn't ask people to change their behavior. I really wanted to know how big the problem is because White Ops is not a company that exists to do any work in advertising necessarily. We are a company that exists to make breaking into computers less profitable. This is a security company. It's kind of a next generation step now that antivirus has so definitively stopped working. The concept is, instead of making computers harder to break into, let's make them less profitable to break into. So I want to go after the most profitable cybercrimes with no biases coming into this, and what we learned is that ad fraud is it. This is the financial underpinning of breaking into everyday, regular people's computers. It's a big open question in computer security. Why hack grandma? Her email is not that interesting. She doesn't have enough money in the bank to rob. What we've learned is that when you hack 1 million grandmas and you make them view 1 billion ads in the background, then you can make $1 million, and that's really quite appealing. So this is what is driving innovation in rootkits. It's what's driving innovation in what we call exploit kits, which is new ways of breaking into computers. And we're facing literally the world's most sophisticated cybercriminals. We didn't ask any of the brands participating in this study to turn their verification systems off, because I wasn't trying to market some kind of new ad product to them. So I didn't want to create a before and after. I wanted to study how ads were actually being bought and sold today with all of the existing protections in place. Then once we were able to do that, then we could extrapolate those findings across ad buying in general, and that's how we learned that this was approximately a $6 billion problem. We also found that ad fraud was not evenly distributed. It was not a question of 11%, 12% losses across the board. If 12 cents of every dollar was being lost, then perhaps we could just price this problem in and solve it through economics, but that wasn't the case at all. What we found was that it was 100% of particular ad spends that were going to crime. The The spread across participants was really remarkable. 3% versus 22%, that was the spread across different media buying teams. But when we dug in and we looked at different campaigns for the same brand run by the same team, we still saw extraordinarily large spreads. In fact, we saw spreads between almost 0% fraud and almost 98% fraud. So in other words, bots were taking out entire campaigns. It's not like they're just skimming off the top of every single ad buy that you're doing. Instead, they're hitting certain ones extremely hard. We also saw variations across different media types and across different buying channels. For instance, video was over twice as bawdy as display fraud, not least because the CPMs are higher and that attracts sophisticated criminals. They follow the money. We also found that programmatic inventory was bawdier than direct buys, but look, not substantially. So we found the average bot fraud level across programmatic at 17%. I think everyone was expecting programmatic to be worse. We found, yes, it's a little worse, but it's not constituting the bulk of the problem, right? We're not getting to levels this big just because of programmatic ad spending. What this tells you is that there's a shocking amount of bot fraud in direct media buys, and I'll explain the criminal dynamics of that. It mostly comes from that figure you're seeing there about sourced traffic. What do we mean by this? We mean traffic that is being bought by a publisher to increase its own viewer numbers. Now, to explain this in some more depth, let's put our black hats on and I will talk to you about how the bad guys actually make money. If you're considering changing careers, now is not a bad time. There are two ways that the bad guys make money. The first is probably the easiest to understand. It's with fake sites. There are a lot of just fake sites hiding out there in the long tail. They're affecting programmatic buys. They're affecting run-of-the-network buys. They're legitimate looking. The fact is that this is a multi-million-dollar crime. If you're good at ad fraud at all, if you can get any check whatsoever, it can be a £1 million check. So you can spend really quite a bit of money on what we call the cash-out sites, the fake websites, so that they look legitimate. If you're smart, that's what you do. And the smart criminals set up a lot of these fake websites, so they can just direct a portion of their bot traffic to each one. No one's really policing small checks. So if you make money 10K at a time per site, that can fly under the radar, but when you add that up across a portfolio of 100 such sites, then you have a nice little crime. So we see lots of these things hiding in the long tail, fake celebrity news sites, culture sites of various kinds. That's the basic model of the crime that I think everyone understands. It's certainly what I was expecting when I started this venture. We thought that what we had to do is essentially police the internet for the bogus websites, so we could kind of circulate a global blacklist or something and be done with this. But wait, there's more. When real sites need more traffic, they end up buying it from third parties, and those third parties are getting it from fourth parties, and those fourth parties might be getting it from fifth parties, and it turns out that the sixth party is a botnet. The fake sites feature awful content. It's typically scraped. Or if it's a video destination site, it typically just has a bunch of thumbnails and a bunch of fake video views. The source traffic, when one site is paying another for traffic, is a shockingly pervasive practice. I was seeing extremely high bot levels on the websites of like magazines I used to subscribe to. We're talking name brands being affected. This is because everyone who's running a media company right now is interested in an engaged audience, and they'll try to get it any way that they can. And the global botnet population has gone through 10 years of innovation, 10 years of different verification companies, measurement companies, and big networks like Google, Facebook, AOL, Twitter, et cetera, combing through their big data and picking out anomalies. So there's a survivorship bias here. All of the botnets that exist today, the good ones that make a lot of money, are wickedly good at hiding in the noise. They're wickedly good at looking like humans, and they're wickedly good at faking engagement. So the publishers who are sourcing bot traffic through what looks like a really complex ecosystem are not engaging in backroom deals that feels like they're hiring organized crime to run a botnet. They're not themselves running a botnet out of the back room. They're simply trying to source an audience through the exact same monetization platforms that absolutely everyone is using to make money in this ecosystem. It'd be easy if everyone was buying the bots through Bots R Us or something. We could just black hole that on the internet and be done with this problem. But it's the same audience platforms, it's the same exchanges that everyone is using to legitimately conduct business that are also the places you can go for the bots, which means that there's no easy way to carve them out. And that means that we have a wickedly difficult problem. Why are publishers doing this? Because they're trying to hit revenue targets at eCPMs that the market will bear. They're trying to maintain their ComScore numbers. And they're doing it in a market that feels like there's an infinite amount of inventory. You know, we all talk about how anyone can set up a website and be in the media business. But the fact is that there's not an infinite amount of inventory, because the inventory doesn't come from sites, the inventory actually comes from humans, right? What an advertiser is trying to buy is a tiny slice of human attention, and unfortunately that is limited. And you can't generate ad inventory unless you have the combination of human attention and a website. So one of the reasons why it feels like there's an infinite amount of inventory and prices keep going down all the time is because the bots are really happy to supply the difference between the true limited resource that everyone wants and increasing demand. And that's getting spread out not just across fake websites, but across name brand websites. When securing an IO for a buy, no publisher on earth is going to say, I'm so sorry, I can't fill that order. We just don't have that many visitors right now. Here, have some money back. Nobody wants to do that. So instead, they will turn to the third parties that can deliver an audience, and that's how they hit their numbers. You may have noticed that this business is kind of seasonal. You know, there's more people buying advertising, say, between Thanksgiving and Christmas. But are any of you browsing the internet more between Thanksgiving and Christmas? Have you noticed how the price elasticity in this market doesn't actually match, right? So there's tremendously more buying, prices go up just a little bit. Where do all the extra ads come from? It's not from people. I think that typically publishers don't know that they're sourcing fake traffic. This practice is so pervasive that I'm running into cognitive dissonance all the time when we have to explain to someone, I'm so sorry, but some of your traffic is totally bogus. Because they've been doing it for some time. They have personal relationships with companies that exist. We call them bot brokers to just deliver this kind of audience. And it's amazing how accepted this is. It's just become so normal to think that someone can just, you know, deliver a fire hose feed of real human attention, but unfortunately it's not truly the case. So this is really a kind of trafficking mechanism whereby the botnets monetize through premium inventory. And this is actually a bigger problem than policing the long tail for those bogus websites, because when you're buying on the long tail, it's typically at a low CPM. So even if like half of that traffic is bogus, if the absolute spend was small, it doesn't necessarily matter as much as 10% of your media buy on a direct deal being bogus. So when we add up both of these factors, we actually get to this ginormous figure of $6.3 billion. So how is this possible? Well, the number one reason that this is possible is that bots disguise themselves as regular people. Number one way that they do that is by using the computers of regular people. This entire industry in every facet has underestimated the sophistication of the adversaries that we're up against. It's widely thought that what we need to do is look for bots that are mimicking human behavior. And that feels like an easy problem because no one has solved the Turing test. So if what you have to do is look for some artificial intelligence that's trying to fake being human, well, we can pick out the strange regularities in programmed behavior and say, there's the bot. And initial bot strategies worked like that. But there was a big leveling up in innovation just a couple of years ago. We think that this is what led to the explosive growth that ended up getting hacker companies like me interested in taking these guys on, where the botnet operators don't have to fake being human. They just have to take advantage of the humans running the computers that they control. Those human beings are logging into Gmail, they're sharing things on Facebook, they're sending tweets, and all of those things are being expressed in cookies that the bot can read, because the bot can read absolutely anything on the hard drive. So the bot doesn't have to fake human behavior. It can just replay those cookies and look like a copy of a real human being. And it can emulate the behavior of the real human being. It can emulate the mouse movements, the scrolling behaviors, the interactions with the page. So that's a substantially easier programming challenge. Instead of faking being human, you just replay the human behaviors that you have access to in a million-node botnet, and you can dupe absolutely everyone, which includes the world's best data scientists, which means that that is how you beat Google, Facebook, AOL, Twitter, et cetera. That's how this crime scales. They're using the mechanisms of targeting against us. So this isn't a passive adversary. This isn't a campaign to kind of squeeze out inefficiencies by getting better at measurement or something like that. This is an enemy that's actively playing back against us using our own tools, which makes it substantially harder and actually in some ways more interesting, right? Which is why we're all here. Now, source traffic also affects programmatic. The way that it affects programmatic is interesting. When a publisher is sourcing traffic, what this really means is that they're driving visitors from a third party to their websites. So you don't see this in the ad ecosystem. It just means that bot traffic is mixing in with the human visitors to a website. So there's absolutely no way to distinguish between a robotic visitor and a human visitor when they're both just kind of coming into the front door. So we see that source traffic affecting direct buys because it's just a portion of all of the visitors to a website. And similarly, it affects programmatic buys just by being a portion of all the impressions sold, which again means that there's no easy way to just kind of carve this out. And it means that the state of the art in detection is not about keeping a blacklist of bogus sites. It's about being able to differentiate between the real human and the fake human originating from the same computer with the same cookie, which is the wickedly difficult problem that unfortunately should be table stakes for this game, because if you can't do that, then you can't really be effective here. Now, I've talked to a lot of people in the industry at this point, so I'm now going to kind of go through what I find to be the top 4 objections when I break the bad news that we all have to take on cybercrime as part of our day jobs now. I think that there's broad acceptance that there's fraud in this ecosystem, but again and again I encounter the opinion that fraud is something that happens to other people. It's not happening to me because I'm just doing premium buying, I'm just doing direct buying, I'm just dealing with the top tier, and I haven't found that yet. It'd be really cool, actually, to find some ad buying methodologies that were just perfectly clean, because then we could create replicable case studies for everybody else. But we haven't run into them yet, at least not at scale. This is a for-profit enterprise, the conducting of ad fraud, and so at the point at which you start spending a lot of money, you end up attracting criminals on the internet. That's actually one of the rules of the internet. It's that it's filled with cat videos and bad people. The second myth to blow up is that you're immune if you buy direct. This is just patently untrue. Sometimes we've seen direct media buys that were 98% bot, which is really, really shocking. But because of audience extension and traffic sourcing, there's simply no way to use, let's say, reputation as a guard against bot traffic. Again, the publishers don't necessarily know that they're bot traffickers. They're working through, in some cases, trusted third parties, but those trusted third parties are feeding them bots, and that's how they're hitting the CPMs that they're hitting. Unless Cy Newhouse is personally subsidizing your ad campaign, if you've been knocking down the prices against your media vendors for the past several years, you should question how that's possible. Now, let's talk about measurement and buying on attribution. as Quinn noted, we saw a lot of bot traffic in retargeted ad campaigns. In fact, across retargeting, we found that the bot percentage was 19% as a weighted average. 19. This is retargeted display inventory, and recall that the average bot level across display inventory was 11%. So what this means is that retargeted ads were bottier than average, which is mind-blowing because a lot of retargeting is actually priced on a cost per action basis, like you're paying for conversions. So you'd expect also that since in retargeting you're only showing ads to people who've shown some kind of purchase intent, that again, you would only be showing ads to real people because bots don't buy things, and so they therefore don't show a lot of purchase intent. But we found that the opposite is true, and that goes to show you the scope of cookie copying. So what the bots are doing is they're copying the cookies of real human beings, and then they're being shown retargeted ads. And then sometimes they're also poisoning attribution models, which I found particularly hilarious, so I'm going to walk you through how that happens. Now, it turns out that some people who show a purchase intent actually then go and they buy the thing. They buy the thing that they showed some intent to buy, whether or not you showed them an ad. So if they convert kind of naturally because that's one of the things that people do, and in the meantime, their bot clone was shown a retargeted ad for that thing with the same cookie on some bogus cash out site, then the bot impression gets credit for the purchase. And this happens so frequently that it's actually raised the average bot levels of retargeted campaigns across the board. So this has also kind of poisoned a whole bunch of first and third party data sources because no one thought about this cookie copying problem. It's actually kind of a fundamental authentication problem. Banks struggled with this for some time. Right now on the internet, you simply can't trust the other end of a connection, even if they have the right password, the right username, the right dongle for extra authentication purposes, because the other end of the connection might have your customer behind it and also a piece of malware that's going to interfere with the banking transaction, send money instead of to point A to point B instead. This is a problem that's been affecting financial institutions for several years, and this is a variation on it. The entire ad ecosystem treats the cookie as a kind of authentication token. We simply trust that when you write a cookie to a computer and you see it later, that it's the same cookie, and that no one's messed with it in the meantime. So this turns out to be a giant security hole in, roughly speaking, the entire digital ad landscape. And it's a security hole that you can drive a truck through. Trucks laden with money every second. And it screws up even CPA buys. And finally, you may be thinking, well, okay, fine, so there's fraud, and it's affecting everyone, but it's not affecting me because I am using Acme verification, and Acme verification is protecting you. Let me tell you that the scope of cybercrime in this field is affecting not just the small players, and is therefore overrunning not just the ad analytics startups, it's affecting the massive networks, the guys that have been doing this for a long time and compete every year to hire the world's best data scientists. So it's an understatement to say that the industry has been kind of overrun by our adversaries. Let me just walk you through some of the incentives here. So when the bad guys win, they make millions. And when the good guys win, they get to keep their IT job for another day. Who's going to win in that scenario? It's probably bad guys. They can spend millions of dollars on reverse engineering, which is extremely important to understand. Every day we're facing an enemy that is innovating. And the good guys need to innovate as well. You need to keep up an arms race with everyone at once. And that's a very expensive proposition, particularly when one side can bring more resources to bear because their incentives are better. So if you're going to make $5 million perpetrating this crime, then you could spend $1 million reverse engineering everyone that stands in your way, and still have a nice ROI. So there's no perfect metric here. There's no perfect way of detecting these adversaries. Every detection method has a freshness date. And it's really hard to play this game because when you lose, you don't get a signal that you lose. In fact, losing feels like winning. Because what does losing mean in this context? Losing means you stop detecting all the bots. That means that you start detecting less. That means that the bot numbers go down. And so you could think not, oh my God, I'm losing, but instead, oh my God, we're winning. Look, the bot numbers are down. We've turned the tide. And we see this across the board. This is very much a game of cyber warfare, and the only way to win it is through economics. We need to make the crime less profitable by directing fewer dollars to the bogus impressions, and we need to do that at enough scale that it starts upsetting the value proposition to our adversaries. And the fact is that big data analytics is just not getting the job done. So now having kind of walked you through the criminal dynamics here, let me explain a little bit about how we have been waging a counteroffensive against these threats and how we've been working with Videology and why. So what we're doing is directly detecting the malware on the other end of the connection. So we can differentiate between a real human browser and in the malware, which is kind of the industry term for virus, which is the older term, that's literally perpetrating the crime. Just to be clear, a bot is an extra browser instantiation running in the background of someone's computer. They have no idea, and it's just looking at ads all day. Or if they're really clever, it's not looking at ads all day, it's only looking at ads when the real user is using their computer, so then the bot, the piece of malware, emulates the regular human usage patterns of the internet. Smart guys do things like that. So instead of doing statistical anomaly detection, instead of trying to look for things that are out of place, we simply detect on an impression by impression level whether the HTTP session that we're in is with a live real human browser, or if it is with a background browser, or a fake browser, or a malware-infested browser. This is a rather awesome approach because it gives direct evidence of the crime on a per-impression basis. So it's really, 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 really hard to argue with us. We don't give evidence in terms of something like suspiciousness. I absolutely can't stand the use of that term because you can call absolutely anything suspicious. You really can't stop a check because you're saying that some impressions are suspicious. But you can absolutely stop payment if you can prove that some impressions were being served to malware, so that's precisely what we do. So what this means is that Videology is bringing some like hardcore real InfoSec talent to this game at global scale, which is rather cool, by people who are literally reverse engineering malware every day and then using that to create what we call bot prints to do our evidence-based detection. This is a kind of leapfrog of everyone else, such that right now we kind of have it easy. We're driving innovation on the defensive side in this industry and defeating most of the botnets because it's like we just brought, we have the big gun at level 1 of this game. Like no one was expecting an innovation like this. So we have it easy for another probably 10 months or so, just based on prevailing adaptation cycles on the part of our adversaries. Right now, it's in the rational best interests of the botnet operators to not take us on so much as just rob everyone else a little bit more, right? Because we're not pervasively adopted across the industry. White Ops actually vets its customers to an extraordinary degree. We don't just sell this service to anyone because it's rather powerful in the wrong hands. So one of the reasons why it took us a long time to get to this stage, as Quinn was saying, we started working together over a year ago, is that it was very much a mutual partnership, and we were very much, we started walking before we ran to make sure that this was a sustainable partnership where we could afford to purge the bots from the entire platform and then grow with it. And that's how we got here today. And we're starting to drive some innovation. We're also seeing kind of an independent wave of innovation across the last year, just because the industry has started to wake up to this issue. My colleague Dan says that the parasite grew so large it started to endanger the host. You know what I mean? If the bad guys were just a little less greedy, they probably could have just kept this up for an extremely long time. But now the problem just got so out of hand that nobody can miss it. And so a lot of buying decisions are starting to be driven based on an awareness that fraud is a problem. And what that means is that the pace of innovation on the part of our adversaries has increased, whether or not they're directly taking white ops on. We're seeing more cloaked bots. We're seeing more malicious toolbars, which is a particularly sophisticated attack where the ad fraud is actually being perpetrated in the browser that a real user is using at the time that they're using it. It's not even a separate browser process, which is pretty fascinating. And we're starting to see some sophisticated ad injection where it's not just the advertiser that's getting harmed, but it's actually the publisher as well, because a publisher's ads are getting overwritten by malware on a client's machine, so different ads run in the place of the ones that the publisher intended. So I'm expecting that innovation cycle to actually shorten as the financial pressures mount, and also as our adversaries adapt to the need to placate this market. So what good innovation on the part of the botnet operators means is that portions of the botnets go dark and nobody can see them anymore, which again means that the numbers go down. And it's extremely important right now that the botnet operators make everyone feel like the problem is going away with a minimal amount of actual change. So taking the kind of hardcore approach that White Ops and Videology is, where we're not just changing things on the surface, but on a really deep level that affects how ads are served in real time, is like it's like the nuclear option against fraud. It's incredibly bold, and the reason why this can work so well is precisely because, and this is strangely counterintuitive, going after all the bots at once feels like something that is extremely dangerous because it upsets the apple cart the most. You know, we're gonna purge all of the fraud that White Ops can catch, not just all of the fraud that the analytics companies can catch. You think about the economics of that. That means that Videology chose to institute a higher standard than ComScore, for instance. And why do that? Like, why cut into your available inventory to purge even the most sophisticated fraud that almost by definition is duping everyone else, which means you really don't have to cut it? And the answer is that when we're doing this at a very high level, which means that we are catching O'Day botnets that no one else catches, but we're doing it at an impression by impression level, this means that we can actually surgically excise the fraud. So in cases where you have a publisher, for instance, that has an organic human audience, also has an infected audience, we could just prevent ads from going to the infected computers while we continue serving the live human computers. So even though the standard is extremely high, which intuitively means you think it would have the greatest inventory impact, because of the precision of taking an evidence-based approach, we can actually more carefully just carve out the bots and keep all of the human traffic, which then has the least impact on reach, which honestly I was actually kind of surprised by. It was really cool to see that come together in such a neat way, because I was thinking that the outrageously high white ops standards would be maybe like the hardest pill to swallow, but with this platform, our approaches have dovetailed rather nicely. Now, I'm going to leave you with three points of conclusion. First is that because of the sophistication of this crime and also because it uses as a platform everyday computers, ad fraud is actually the #1 monetization engine of botnets. In other words, this is the answer to the question, why hack grandma? When someone creates a new botnet, what that means is that they infect a new set of computers with what we call the rootkit, which is a system of remote control of computers. And the best practice on the part of the bad guys is to infect a whole bunch of machines through drive-by downloads, through a phishing email attack. There are a variety of different ways. And then you get each one of them to dial home, and you kind of explore each one of them to see what you caught. And if you get lucky, maybe you infect a machine that is the personal machine of a CFO of a big company. So that's an awesome catch. And so you'll put that into what's called the APT bucket, where you're going to very stealthily use that computer as a beachhead to then launch a much more sophisticated corporate attack. But that requires luck, and you only get a few of those machines. The preponderance of the machines that you get are just going to be regular everyday computers, just regular everyday people. They don't have any government secrets. They don't have any special corporate access. They don't have a tremendous amount of money to rob. But you can turn them into an ad bot. So that's the foundation for attack at scale, which is what's bringing companies like me to bear on this problem. What this means, therefore, also is that bot fraud is the scalable form of ad fraud. When you go through the laundry list of various forms of malfeasance, and there really are a lot, publishers can scam this industry in a variety of ways, especially like the small ones hiding in the long tail. Those don't scale like bots scale, because the kinds of malfeasance that you can pull off as a publisher, adding too many ads to a page and stacking them in this way and refreshing them in that way, you can only get away with those things if no one's really paying attention, which means if there isn't really a very big audience, which means that the CPMs on those sites are relatively low. It's affecting long tail buys. So yes, dollars are being lost, but not billions of dollars, because that's just it's not possible. The amazing thing about bot fraud is they can affect high CPM buys, and the sophisticated bots can just go completely undetected and mix in with the human audience. That means that on a dollar-adjusted basis, bot fraud is vastly more important than any other such quality issue, because the rest all essentially get rationally priced by the market. The bot fraud, by faking engagement, by poisoning attribution models, doesn't get efficiently priced. It affects even high CPMs, which is why it's the thing that really makes money at scale. And finally, not all defenses are created equal. In order to really win this fight, we need to bring an entirely new set of weapons to bear. And just broadly speaking, the tools of ad tech optimization are great for tackling waste. They're not great for addressing an adversary that knows how those tools work and is actively trying to undermine them and fake the measurements. So there's a wide variation in the quality of approaches to this problem, and so it's important to not be complacent or to think that you just need to check a box. Thank you.